So, as Mokhtara said, tonight is our last night on this theme. And next week we're starting an exciting new theme, right? Yeah, and so we've been looking, since the new year, we've been looking at the 7-point mind training. And we've seen that this is a sort of pithy condensation of some really fundamental, basic, basic in the sense of not like really elementary, but fundamental Buddhist teachings. It's a condensation boiled down and presented in this really powerful way, which helps us to practice it in our day-to-day lives. So tonight I'm rounding off, and what I aim to do tonight is to remind us of some of the main points of that teaching, just get a sort of bit of an overview, bring it all together a little bit, and to bring out some of the things that perhaps we can take away. Bring out, if we've been coming to this series, what could we apply in our practice, even if we're not going to sort of carry on, as it were, with the whole mind training system. There are bits of it which are completely basic to Buddhism, which could transform our practice. What would I like to take forward? So I'm going to make some suggestions about things that we could carry forward from the mind training and incorporate in our practice. So yeah, backtracking to the very first evening of this course, we heard how this mind training tradition originated in Indonesia, which at that time was a Buddhist country, with a practitioner called Dharmakirti. And we heard how an Indian practitioner called Atisha. The story goes that he had a vision while he was meditating at Bodh Gaya, the site of the Buddha's enlightenment. He had a vision in which he was told that he needed to seek out this Dharmakirti. He needed to go to Indonesia, and that finding this teaching was going to be the thing that really sort of brought his practice alive. This was what he needed to do. It's what he was meant to do. He was going to find this powerful, transformative Dharma that he needed. So he went. He went to Indonesia, a long and difficult journey from northern India, which is where he lived at that time. And he became a disciple of Dharmakirti, and he spent 12 years as a disciple of Dharmakirti, learning and practicing this style of practice, this tradition. And then he returned to India, and over time he became a very famous teacher. He became, in fact, the abbot of the great monastic university of Nalanda. I think some people have said that Nalanda at that time was the biggest university in the world. This huge monastic university. So he became the abbot of Nalanda, incredibly prestigious post. And his fame spread to Tibet. And the king of Tibet heard about him. And at that time, the Buddhism in Tibet had sort of undergone a bit of a degeneration. It had become a bit mixed up with local shamanism, local folk magic practices. The sort of ethical dimension of it seemed to have got lost a little bit. And so the king of Tibet wanted to re-establish the Dharma in Tibet. So he invited Atisha as the man to do this. Atisha didn't want to go. Atisha was in his 50s. Tibet was a pretty grim place, really. It's cold. It was wild. It was dangerous. The food is atrocious. I don't know if you ever had any Tibetan food. I think at the time, particularly. It was a difficult place, and he was getting on a bit. A dangerous, primitive place. But the story goes that while he was meditating on his personal bodhisattva Tara, the female bodhisattva of active compassion, while he was meditating, she told him, well, actually, if you go to Tibet, your life will be shortened. I think she said, your life will be shortened by 12 years. But you will do immense good. You will do immense good. So he practiced the bodhisattva ideal, so he had to go. Well, he felt he wanted to go. So he went. He went to Tibet. And he had a huge impact in Tibet. Yeah, so of course one of the things he took with him to Tibet was this tradition of mind training. And he remained in Tibet until his death, which I think was at the age of 73, so he would have lived to be quite a grand old man if he hadn't gone. He died at the age of 73 and passed on the mind training tradition to his disciples. They passed it on to their disciples. It gradually spread out until actually it was taken on over time by every single major school of Tibetan Buddhism has a sort of style of this mind training incorporated with it. If you go and look in sort of bookshops or whatever, look on Amazon under mind training, you'll be overwhelmed by the number of books there are. There's just loads and loads of books. There's the 8 verses of training the mind, there's the 7 points of mind training, and even under the 7 points of mind training, you'll find, well, that one's a bit different from that. They've sort of reordered it differently. There's a whole load of things tacked on at the end of that one. So it became, it diversified because it was part of a, it was taken up by quite a lot of different schools, different people. But there are always some essential core teachings that all these different versions have in common. And perhaps the most important of them is to use what we normally think of as adversity, what we normally think of as bad things happening, things we don't want to happen, to use that as the path to enlightenment. To use the bad things that happen, the things we don't want to happen, the ordinary discomforts and disappointments and sufferings that are an inevitable part of life, to turn these from things that get in the way of our practice into our practice, the opportunity to practice. So, among Western Buddhists, I don't know whether it's true in the East, and I don't know whether it's true everywhere, it's certainly true in the UK, I suspect it's true in America. Among Western Buddhists, you will quite often hear people talk about their practice. Well, what they mean is their meditation practice. So people will say, my practice is going well. Or I didn't keep up my practice when I was on holiday, I just couldn't find anywhere to meditate. What they mean is, by practice, they mean meditation. In fact, someone said exactly that in my Mitra group last night. They said, my practice is going really well. Well, and what they meant was, my meditation practice is going really well. And I don't blame him for that. I don't blame him for that because that's become quite normal in Buddhist circles to talk that way. It's become perfectly normal. Everybody understood what he meant because that's how Buddhists often express themselves. My practice means my meditation practice. But the fact that that's become quite normal points to something. It points to an attitude that is quite common, I think, among Western Buddhists in particular, that we see our practice as all about meditation. Meditation is huge, and then there's sort of ethics and other bits of dharma down here. Study, ethics, meditation, it's all about meditation. It's all about developing lovely mental states when we're in solitude or in really good conditions, on retreat or insulated from the world by a lovely smelling silent shrine room. That's what our practice is. It's all about when we are, sort of, as it were, secluded from the world, whereas all the annoyances and disappointments and minor sufferings of everyday life and all those irritating people are things that get in the way of our practice, things that stop us experiencing these lovely mental states which are our practice, which are the real goal of Buddhism. So that's quite a common sort of attitude, I think. But the starting point of the mind training tradition is that we need to throw that attitude in the bin. That is just a complete wrong view about the Dharma. If we want to get anywhere, we need to start with our practice, which is our whole life. Then we need to start seeing our everyday interactions with other people, with those irritating other people. That's our practice. The way we handle challenges, that's our practice. how we handle the ordinary ups and downs of everyday life, that is our practice. How we handle conflicts, minor ailments and pains and discomforts, that's our practice. We even need to start seeing those times when the world slaps us in the face and pulls the rug out from under our feet. Even how we handle that is our practice. And in most of those situations, we're not going to be in lovely mental states. We're going to be perhaps experiencing dukkha, unsatisfactory mental states. Now, having said all that, I want that our practice isn't just meditation. I want to clear up a possible misunderstanding, okay? Because this overemphasis on meditation is so common among Western Buddhists, I often go on a bit about this. I often go on a bit saying, I say what I've said here. And some people hear that. Some people hear that as me saying meditation isn't important, okay? In fact, I was talking to a Mitra friend not long ago about his practice, and I said, you really need to, what you really need to do now is to intensify your meditation. And he said, what? I thought you didn't believe in meditation. He was surprised, so I thought, so I just want to say that no, meditation is really, really important. Meditation is a really important part of our practice. We need to meditate if we're going to really cultivate more positive states of mind. That means we need to spend time in good conditions to meditate, actually, conditions that help us to meditate. We probably only make real strides forward in meditation on retreat. What we do in our home is more like maintenance practice often. As we get more experience, we need to find time for solitude, to go on solitary retreats as well. We need to do that, but meditation is not the only thing. I suppose it's been so overemphasized in the West that we need to sort of, to some extent, de-emphasize it. That doesn't mean it's not important. Buddhism, meditation isn't the only thing, and being in lovely mental states isn't the only thing about Buddhism. It isn't the only goal. Buddhism is about growing. And part of growing is becoming stronger and more robust in the face of the difficulties that life throws at us. There are things about ourselves that we only discover when we're with other people, when we're in difficult situations. There are things about ourselves that we can only learn to handle when we're with other people, when we're in difficult mental states. I'm afraid we could probably spend time meditating and think we're almost enlightened, and then come back to the world and somebody pushes our button and off we go. In fact, the first time I ever did a solitary retreat, I did it in Spain. I knew this Spanish guy called Quique, and he had been in this place before me. So as I was sort of staying in the community that was attached to this solitary retreat facility, and I met him. He was just leaving. And I said, how are you, Quique? How was it? And he said, well, you know what it was like. I've just spent 2 weeks meditating. I think I'm enlightened. But I won't on Monday. So we need to also practice in the hurly-burly of everyday life. So what the mind training tells us, when evil fills the world and its inhabitants, turn adversity into the path to enlightenment. Use the difficult things that happen in everyday life as opportunities to grow and develop. And the 7-point mind training that we've been looking at offers us 2 main ways to do that. There's more to it than that, but it offers us 2 main ways to do that. Firstly, it says, turn adversity into the path of practice by using it as an opportunity to develop compassion and empathy and connection to others, solidarity with others. Secondly, it says we can use adversity as an opportunity to develop wisdom. So those 2 things, compassion, empathy, and wisdom on the other hand. So looking at the first very briefly, yes, usually when things go badly for us, when we're suffering in some way, what we do is we focus on ourselves. I think if you think about your experience, you'll find that's the case. You know, when you're ill, it's like me. When we're sad, when things go wrong, we tend to focus on ourselves. So adversity, unfortunately, which causes suffering, causes dukkha, tends to force us in on ourselves. And that's a real problem because we're bound to experience some suffering in life, some dukkha, and we need a way to use that inevitable dukkha in a positive way. And the mind training, what it does is, instead of it says that instead of allowing dukkha to cut us off from others, we should find ways, we should practice using it to connect us to others, because we all suffer. We all suffer. So we can connect our suffering with the suffering of others. When we are suffering, we go out, we mentally go out to others who are suffering. Just the same, realizing it's not just me, we all suffer. There are other people suffering in just the same way as I am right now. Maybe they're around me right now, maybe they're somewhere else, but there are people just like me suffering right now. And in that way, we can use our suffering and the compassion, if you like, we feel for ourselves as a connection to others. So our suffering becomes a gateway into metta, compassion, empathy, and a sense of solidarity for others. And there's a story from the Pali Canon which illustrates this absolutely spot on, absolutely perfectly, which is the story of Kisa Gotami. So Kisa Gotami is a young woman whose baby dies. Her baby dies. And she is totally distraught. She is, to the point of madness almost. She's totally distraught. She's going around with a dead baby, totally cut off from others, totally cut off from reality, asking people if they can do something to help her sick baby when her baby is dead. And somebody, rather wisely, advises her to go and see the Buddha. The Buddha perhaps can help you. And the Buddha says, yes, well, I can cure your dead baby. All you have to do is get me a mustard seed, just a mustard seed. He says, oh, okay. He says, oh, just one thing about this mustard seed. The mustard seed has to come from a house where nobody has died. From a family where nobody has died, I think maybe might be more appropriate for our situation. It has to come from a family where nobody's died. So she goes off, full of hope, and she knocks on a door and says, well, could I have some mustard seed? So the Buddha says you can use it to cure my baby. And they say, oh, of course, yeah. And she said, well, just one thing, it has to come from a family where nobody's died. And they say, well, I'm sorry, my father died last year, or my wife died, or my child died. And this happens at every single house, over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, until eventually Kisa Gotami clocks it. I'm not special. This isn't just me. This is all of us. This is all of us have to face this. So her focus on herself and her own sufferings expands out. It expands out. And she goes back and asks to be ordained, actually, into the Buddha's order of nuns. So I think what we see there is a quite clear case of somebody, the Buddha using very, very skillfully, using a very skillful means to make somebody who is totally wrapped up in their own suffering aware that, I'm sorry, it's just all of us. It's just all of us. The appropriate response to this is solidarity, empathy with others. As the Bodhicharya Avatar, the guide to the path of the Bodhisattva says, it's not your suffering, it's just suffering. It's just suffering. So we can do something which sort of in a homeopathic way is a bit like Kisa Gotami. we can become aware that it's not just my suffering. Others also suffer. And I think bringing that into the mind training tradition, the 7-point mind training, gives us a meditation which helps us to do that. It's probably a little bit complicated for most of us, but you can expand your metta bhavana practice in that way. When we focus on ourselves in the metta bhavana, we can become aware of our suffering. And throughout the ways that we suffer at the moment, the ways that things are unsatisfactory for us. And throughout the practice, we can use that as a way of going out to others. And particularly in the last stage, well, people all over the place are suffering just the same as me. And in that way, we can use our suffering as a way of connecting more with others. Sometimes when we're happy as spring lambs, we're actually a bit cut off. Other people who are suffering, well, poor thing. But actually our suffering can be a way of creating much more empathy with others. So it can be a really positive, a real spiritual positive. So we can transform adversity, transform our dukkha, transform the discomfort, pain, suffering into something positive by using it as a way of developing compassion and empathy for others, solidarity with others. Then the second way that the mind training tradition advises us that we can transform the adversity of everyday life is to use it as an opportunity to develop wisdom. So, and it really gives us two ways to do that, two slightly different ways to do that. So the first of those two ways is that it asks us to realise how much of our suffering is actually created by our own minds, by our own attitudes, by the stories we tell about what our life is about. So yeah, we all have sort of ideas, well, life's about this, and if it goes wrong, then that's terrible. So very often, the stories we tell about what is important and what our life is about are concerned with what are called the 8 worldly winds, traditionally. Gain and loss. Gain, good. Loss, bad. Approval and disapproval. Disapproval, bad, adverse. Pleasure and pain. Pleasure, good. Pain, really bad. Or even discomfort, quite bad. And status or loss of status. Status, good. Others getting one over on us. Others looking down on us, definitely bad. So those are the sort of scorecards we often use to gauge situations. If I'm gaining, it's great. If people approve of me and like me and keep telling me nice things about myself, that's great. If I'm having loads of pleasure, that's great. And if people really respect me, that's great. And if the opposite happens, that's adversity, that's bad. If I lose something, that's adversity. Lose money, lose possessions. If I get blamed or people disapprove of me, that's bad. If I suffer pain or discomfort, that's bad. And if anyone gets anything over on me and I don't get my own way or people look down on me, that's bad. That's adversity. But those are stories. Those are stories about what is good and bad. They are not the stories that a more advanced spiritual practitioner would tell about what is good and bad. They are certainly not the stories that a bodhisattva would tell about what is good and bad. They're not even the stories that someone whose main aim in life was to grow and develop would tell about what is good and bad. So gain and loss. Do we really think that the meaning in life lies in money and possessions? Do we really think that? Is that what our life's about? If we do, we're not going to have much time for spiritual development. It takes your life to do that. If you want to get rich, you need to devote yourself to it. What we're going to do is get trapped by our bank balance and our possessions. I recently saw a news item about a woman who had lost everything she owned in a bushfire. And she said, losing everything has made me stronger. Someone whose aim in life is to grow would see becoming stronger as a good thing and losing everything as, well, comes and goes. That's how a bodhisattva would see things. Becoming strong is what's important, not possessions. Approval and disapproval? Well, the approval of people we really respect is worth having. It probably means we're doing something right. But why do we even fear the disapproval of people who we wouldn't want to be like? We don't respect. Anyone who decides to live a different sort of life than the script that's handed down to them by society will face disapproval. If we want to be ourselves, if we want to live by our own values, if we want to be individuals, true individuals, face it, disapproval is great. It's a sign that something's going right, okay? Pleasure and pain, or pleasure and discomfort. Well, some pain and discomfort, I'm afraid, is an inevitable part of having a fragile and impermanent body. And if we want to grow, if we want to be able to be in the gap, we have to be able to face discomfort. We have to learn to face discomfort. If we always seek passing pleasures, we become addictive and weak. Someone whose main aim is to develop spiritually would be trying to rise above pleasure and pain, to act skillfully whichever one comes. And status and lack of status, well, to quote the Bodhicharyavatara, again, the chains of status and reputation have no place on someone who is seeking liberation. It's just, I mean, actually, Shantideva goes on quite a lot about this. He says, well, what do you get from it? What do you get from having a big name? He says, well, it doesn't, does it give you pleasure? Does it, do you get better food? What do you get from it? It's completely imaginary. It's completely imaginary. So status and lack of status. So those are the normal worldly stories that, unless we make an effort to step out of them, we will often use to decide whether a situation is good or adverse. Are we getting the right side of the worldly winds? Are we getting gain, approval, pleasure and status? Or if we're getting loss, blame, pain, losing status, that makes a situation adverse. But these, as I said, are not the stories that a bodhisattva would tell. They're not the stories that somebody who sees spiritual development as the main aim of life would tell. They would be irrelevant. Such people would be asking, does this situation give me a chance to grow, to become stronger, to rise above trivial concerns? And does it give me the opportunity to be more compassionate, to connect more with others, to have more solidarity with others? Does it give me the opportunity to be of use, to help others? So if we can change our story and look at the world through the eyes of a more advanced spiritual practitioner, what looked like adversity from our previous position becomes something that looks positive. An opportunity to grow, an opportunity to develop some spiritual muscle, an opportunity to develop more empathy with others. So yeah, I mean, of course, not all of our dukkha. I mean, so I've talked about how a lot of our dukkha is mind-created. It's created by the stories we tell. Not all of our dukkha is created by the stories we tell. Some actual pain and suffering is an inevitable part, as I said, of having a fragile, impermanent body. But even that can be seen as an opportunity with a different attitude. So, Shantideva again in the Bodhicharyavatara, the guide to the path of the Bodhisattva. With practice, anything becomes easy. So learning to tolerate slight discomforts. So by learning to tolerate even slight discomforts, even great pain becomes bearable. So we should practice seeing the discomfort caused by bugs, fleas and mosquitoes, hunger and thirst, or itches and scratches as nothing to bother about. Then we will be able to graduate to the suffering caused by cold and heat, rain and wind, travelling, illness, and eventually even imprisonment and beatings. If we don't learn to tolerate these things, our mental distress will just make us suffer even more. So yeah, I mean, it's a question of attitudes, isn't it? I mean, the Buddha gives a sutta about this. He says, well, there is some suffering in the world. It's the sutta called the arrow. He says, yeah, we get stabbed by an arrow. And then what we do is stab ourselves with several other arrows as a result of it. That's our mental response. If we change our mental response, if we have the mental response that Shantideva is talking about, where, well, great in a way, fleas and bugs, they're an opportunity to, tolerating them is an opportunity to develop a sort of spiritual strength, a bit of spiritual muscle, a bit of robustness in the face of adversity, which can lead us to be able to tolerate more things, even imprisonment and beatings. And I think, when we hear about how some of the monks in Tibet put up with their imprisonment and beatings, we can see that can work, that attitude can work. I think we maybe even see it with ourselves. I mean, if we've ever been into sports, exercise, mountain climbing, mountaineering, anything like that, well, you put up, don't you? I mean, you do it. You expect to get cold, tired, depending what you're doing. And it's just part of it. It's just part of it. So we just do it. But because we've got a label on it which says this is play, it's fine. So it's very often influenced by the labels we put on things. I bet you get really cold and tired sailing, for example. Huh? Yeah. And if we, under different circumstances, I'm not doing that. Get cold and tired. So there you go. So even real pain is an opportunity to develop some strength. And as part of our growth, we need to develop some strength. We need to become more robust in the face of what life throws at us. If we're weak, we will just focus on our own problems. We won't have the resources in the face of our own problems to go out to others. We won't have the mental space for others. We won't concern ourselves with others. We'll be concerned with ourselves. So we can't be of use to others. But above all, the aspiring bodhisattva wants to be of use. He or she wants to make a contribution to help solve the existential problem that we all face, and that requires some strength. So that's one aspect of transforming adversity into practice by wisdom. When something we experience seems adverse, bad, not what we want, that gives us an opportunity to identify the story we're telling and to change that story for the story that a more advanced practitioner would tell. To see the world through the eyes of someone further along the spiritual path than we are at the moment. But there's another, maybe deeper aspect to the way the mind training suggests we transform adverse conditions into wisdom. And this is summed up in a single short line, which is intended as a meditation practice. It's intended as something we reflect on when our mind is focused and stilled in meditation. And the line runs just simply, see all dharmas as dreamlike. So dharma in Sanskrit is a word with many meanings. When we use it without a capital letter in English, when it's translated into English without a capital letter in Roman text, it means not the teachings of the Buddha or the truth. It means phenomena, things. So in plain language, see all dharmas as dreamlike means see all phenomena, all the phenomena around us as like a dream. See all things as like a dream. Practice seeing everything that happens to you as being like things that happen to you in a dream. And in fact, the world, our life, is a lot like a dream, if we see it more as it really is. I mean, the world and everything in it is transient and insubstantial, constantly changing, ephemeral. This stuff we call matter is mainly empty space, so physicists tell us. In fact, some would say, well, it's mainly just sort of clouds of probability. What does that mean? The only reason we don't fall straight through it is because we're made of the same stuff. It's completely insubstantial. Everything vanishes almost as soon as it comes into existence. You must have seen those movies, those speeded up movies of, say, somebody's garden. And you see day and night, day and night, day and night. Seasons change, season change, season change. Things grow, things fall down. It's always different. It's not, it's just constantly changing. All the circumstances and melodramas around us that we take so seriously, they just all pass and leave not a rack behind, in Shakespeare's words. When they're gone, they might as well never have been. And if we can train ourselves to see the world a bit more like this, to see life more as it really is, then we can keep ourselves a bit above the ups and downs and melodramas that normally obsess us so much. We can be freed from a lot of our anxieties and neurotic concerns. We can be freed from making our happiness depend on external things, which are never going to do the business. And we can be freed, because we're freed from all that stuff in ourselves, we can be freed to be a more positive force for good in the world. We can be more like a bodhisattva, who is in the world but not of the world. Acting for the good of the world, but not dominated by the happenings of the world. So that's a bit of a quick summary. It's not that quick, actually. A bit of a quick summary of the main thrust of the 7-point mind training we've been looking at. It's about making the adversity we experience in our day-to-day lives into something that, from something that gets in the way of practice, into an opportunity for practice, the very arena of practice. By seeing the world more as a bodhisattva would see it, seeing the world more as somebody who is seeking enlightenment, but not just for themselves, so that we can helping everybody, helping us all to become more enlightened. There's a lot more to it than that. Those are the bare essentials. We've heard about the 5 forces, we've heard about the 4 special practices, etc., etc. There's a lot of slogans we've heard about. So there's a lot more to it, but in a way that's the backbone of it. And what I'd like to do to round off the series is to make some suggestions about things that we can perhaps usefully take away and put into our daily practice. And my first suggestion is simply to remember that our everyday life is the place we practice. Practice is not just about having lovely states of mind that need protected conditions. We need meditation, retreats, and solitude, maybe, but we need meditation and retreats, and maybe we need solitude if we're at that stage. But we also need to see our day-to-day interactions with people and the way we handle the ups and downs of life, the way we tackle the challenges we take on. We have to see that as also the real nitty-gritty of our practice. And I think that just really needs bearing in mind, because it's very easy to fall into the sort of, those things get in the way of me feeling good, basically. And my second suggestion is to just simply accept that there is dukkha in our lives. When we accept that, when we see it as absolutely inevitable, rather than seeing it as something that shouldn't be happening, it gets a lot more bearable, actually. It doesn't seem anything like as bad A lot of our dukkha, paradoxically, comes from the fact that we don't accept that there should be dukkha, so that we go into all sorts of mental stories about it and create mental suffering around it. An extension of that, about dukkha, would be not to look for someone to blame for our dukkha. When we experience dukkha, we often cast around, let's then look for someone to blame. It's their fault. There's a slogan, one of the slogans in the mind training, drive all blame onto one. And the point of that is not to be always blaming others, and especially not to hang on to resentments. Resentments just burn the person who holds them. They're like hot coals that burn the person who holds them. So instead of blaming others for our dukkha, that inevitable dukkha that the world will throw up, it helps us much more if we can use our dukkha as an opportunity to practice in the ways that I've been talking about. Another suggestion I'd make is not to be afraid to take on challenges. If we've got the wrong idea about our practice, we can always be looking for an easy life, and a life that encourages nice positive mental states, protected life. Well, that might be good up to a point. I mean, it's really difficult sort of giving Dharma talks because you're always saying things that are wrong for some people. I mean, if we've got a rubbish job that we're doing, in a negative environment that we're doing mainly for the money that's stressing us out, it might be a really good idea to give it up to have a more easy life where we can really get into the Dharma more. But we shouldn't allow the fact that we're Buddhists to make us precious and fragile because we've got to protect our lovely mental states. Buddhism is about growth, and one of the ways we grow is to rise to challenges, to find the resources, to sort of put ourselves in situations even where we think, how the dickens did I do that? Well, we have to find new resources. Sangharakshita refers to them as cremation grounds, where the old self is sort of cremated and we have to step into a new one to make it work. Yes, and when we do that, when we take on challenges, well, using some of the mind training perhaps to deal with the dukkha that will arise, And when dukkha does arise, which it will, to make it a practice to use the small sufferings of everyday life to connect us to others, reflecting, realizing that others right now are experiencing just what I'm experiencing. That could be the people around me. It could be the people around me in this queue, in this traffic jam, in this doctor's waiting room, in this difficult meeting, in this hospital ward. There's people around me now going through just what I'm going through. And sort of doing a guerrilla metabhavana instead of focusing on poor me and I'm so anxious, or when the dickens is this traffic going to move? We're all in this together, feeling a bit of solidarity and compassion for the other people in the same situation. In that way, we transform these apparently negative situations into a really positive aspect of practice. So we can do it for the people around us in those sorts of situations. If we're not in that sort of situation, well, you can be sure that there are other people, many, many, many other people somewhere experiencing just what we're experiencing. So just using our imagination to connect with that. Doing that sort of guerrilla metabhavana, turning our suffering into a metabhavana that connects us to others. So, those are a few. We could, if you've still got your slogan cards, we could use one of the slogans. Give up blaming. Be grateful to everyone. Don't think about others' faults. We didn't get to that one. Don't hold grudges. Don't compete. Don't be temperamental. Or even see all things as like a dream. So, linking to that, lastly, my last suggestion is that we could make it a practice sometimes to imagine that we are a higher being, to imagine that we are a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva whose real home is a higher level of reality, but who is for the time being here with us in this dream, here in this dream. This is what the mind training does in a way. It asks us to pretend that we're a bodhisattva and to see the world the way a bodhisattva sees it, and then to act more like a bodhisattva would act. So we could imagine that we're a bodhisattva. Imagine that we're a being from a higher level of reality in this world, but not of this world, whose real home is a higher realm. And we could imagine from this point of view that we see this world going on around us as like a dream, more like a virtual reality that we're in, but not of, in the way that we might be, if we're lucid dreaming, awake in a dream, we might be in but not of the dream. So we could see that all its melodramas don't really affect us, except insofar that we see that others are suffering. Others are also trapped in this reality. And they are suffering because they are not freed from it. So that we're not here to get what we want. We're here a bit above it all, free, like lucid dreaming, but trying to help. And if we could do that, I mean, get some practice of just using the imagination to do that, maybe in meditation, maybe at other times, reflecting on that. Just, I know it's it's a step beyond where we are. It's using the imagination. But if we could do that, then we might see the truth. We might begin to see the truth of what the 7-point mind training says about itself, which is that this teaching is the essence of the sutras and tantras, profound yet simple. It is difficult to hear deep teaching like this, as rare as finding buried treasure. Okay.